At 1 in the morning, my daughter collapsed at my doorstep. Her eyes were bruised and her lips were split. Sobbing, she confessed, "My husband hit me because of his mistress." I held her in silence. I helped her into the house, and without a word, I put on my police uniform. Ready. I loaded the bullets. Then I dialed my lawyer's number. "Start the plan, now." I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. I had just turned off the TV and slumped onto the sofa, my eyes half closed, after a long, exhausting shift. Being a cop in this town wasn't always a matter of life and death, but that day, I had to break up a fight at the downtown bar and then write the report until the early hours. My body felt heavy. I just wanted to sleep deeply. Outside on the street, the barking of dogs mixed with the buzz of motorcycles from the neighborhood kids speeding by. It was already 1 in the morning, but the neighborhood refused to sleep. I figured the guys were on the corner smoking and drinking some beers like every night. I thought. I closed my eyes trying to ignore the noises so my head could rest. Suddenly, a hurried knocking sounded at the door so loud it made me jump. My heart raced, and my police instincts kicked in immediately. Who could be knocking like that at this hour? I walked quickly to the entrance, grabbing a chair tightly, just in case. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice a little shaky, not from fear, but because I felt something bad was happening. No one answered. There were just a couple more knocks, weaker this time, followed by a choked, trembling voice. "Mom, open up, please." I almost froze. It was the voice of Sarah, my daughter. I unlocked the door in a hurry, my heart pounding in my chest. As soon as I opened it, Sarah collapsed into my arms, trembling like a wounded animal. I hugged her tightly, feeling her limp body, as if she didn't have an ounce of energy left. "Sarah, what happened to you, honey?" I asked, my voice breaking. The yellow porch light hit her face, and I was paralyzed by what I saw. Her lip was split with dried blood at the corner. Her left eye, purple and swollen, could barely open. She was clutching her stomach with her hands as if trying to hide a pain. "My husband, he hit me because of his mistress," Sarah whispered, her voice choked before breaking into heartbreaking sobs. I felt my blood boil, but at the same time my heart broke. My daughter, the one I raised and loved more than my own life was in front of me, shattered. I helped her inside. I laid her on the sofa and ran to the kitchen for a damp cloth and the first aid kit. "Stay still, honey. Let me see," I said, trying to stay calm, although inside I was a wreck. I carefully cleaned the blood from her lip, but it kept coming red raw, as if it were cutting my own heart. The cut was deep. It wasn't just a skin wound. It seemed to carry a much deeper damage. Sarah kept clutching her stomach, her thin hands shaking. Carefully, I removed her hands. I lifted her blouse and, oh my God, I almost dropped the cloth. A huge bruise, black and purple, covered her abdomen, as if she had been hit not once but many times viciously. I felt like I couldn't breathe, as if I had taken the blows myself. "Sarah, who did this to you? It was Robert, wasn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling with rage and pain. Sarah didn't answer. She just cried, and her sobs broke the silence of the house. Without another thought, I grabbed the phone and dialed the number I knew by heart for the town's emergency room. "Dr. Figueroa, please get ready. I'm bringing my daughter over," I said, hurrying. My car was in the shop getting the brakes fixed, so I called a taxi. While we waited, I sat next to Sarah. I covered her with a blanket so she wouldn't be cold. Her cell phone, which she had left on the table, wouldn't stop lighting up. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw 7 missed calls from Robert and some messages that appeared on the lock screen. "Open your mouth if you want to lose everything, bitch." I felt the blood rush to my head. I reached out to grab the phone. I wanted to see more, to know what else he had done to her, but Sarah, though weak, snatched it from me in a panic. "Mom, don't look, it's nothing." She looked at me with eyes full of fear, as if just touching that phone would make everything fall apart. I didn't press her. I just squeezed her hand to calm her down. "I'm here, honey. Nothing is going to happen to you." But inside, I knew this had already gone too far. When the taxi arrived, I helped Sarah get in, supporting her with one arm while clumsily carrying a bag with the other. On the way to the hospital, Sarah was hunched over her head, resting on my shoulder, repeating over and over, "Forgive me, Mom. I didn't want to bother you at this hour, but I couldn't take it anymore. I had to run here." Every word she said was like a stab in my heart. I was her mother. I had promised to protect her all her life, and now she had to come find me in the middle of the night, broken by the man I once trusted. The taxi stopped in front of the hospital, where the cold white light of a neon sign illuminated the words, "Emergency Room." I helped Sarah get out my daughter, who could barely stand. Her body was still shaking, and she was clutching her stomach as if holding on to her last bit of strength. I squeezed her hand, trying to hide how my own heart was racing. "I'm here. Don't be afraid," I whispered, though I was terrified too. Dr. Letitia Figueroa, who was on duty, was already waiting for us at the door. She looked at Sarah, then at me with a worried expression, but said nothing. She just motioned for a nurse to take my daughter to an examination room. I followed my feet, feeling as heavy as lead. When the nurse took off Sarah's thin jacket, I almost gasped. Besides the bruises on her face, her shoulders and wrists were covered in marks of cruelty. Purple and reddish bruises like silent accusations. I stood there motionless, holding onto the edge of a table containing the rage that was burning inside me. "What did this bastard do to you?" I thought, but I didn't dare say it out loud for fear that Sarah would start crying again. Dr. Figueroa carefully noted each injury, her face serious. "We need to do an X-ray to see if she has any fractured ribs," she said, her voice grave but firm. I nodded without saying anything, just watching Sarah lie there, her eyes closed as if trying to escape reality. While I waited for the results, I went down to reception to sign her treatment papers and pay a deposit. My cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I recognized it immediately. If someone was calling at this hour right after Sarah arrived at my house, it could only be Robert. Rage surged through me and I hung up without even answering. He didn't deserve to talk to me, not after what he had done. When I returned to the room, Sarah had fallen into a light sleep, probably from exhaustion. I pulled the blanket up, my hands still shaking. Seeing her face, I remembered the Sarah from before, the cheerful little girl who used to run after me in the yard, shouting, "Mom, look at me!" Now that smile was gone, replaced by wounds and fear. I sat by the bed, watching her sleep, my heart in pieces. I was her mother. I had promised to protect her, and I had let her fall into the hands of a guy like Robert. I blamed myself, but at the same time, a flame of determination began to burn within me. I couldn't let my daughter continue to suffer. Never again. After they put her on an IV and she was stable, I took Sarah home. I made her a glass of warm milk, left it by her bed, and closed the door quietly, making sure she was asleep. It was almost dawn. A faint light filtered through the window. I went out to the porch to tidy up a bit, and I saw Ms. Camilla, the neighbor across the street, sweeping her yard. When she saw me, she hurried over. Her voice rushed. "Did something happen at your house last night, Elizabeth? I heard knocking on the door and some crying." I sighed and briefly told her that Sarah had been beaten by her husband, that he had kicked her out of the house, and she had to take refuge here in the middle of the night. Ms. Camilla gritted her teeth, her eyes flashing. "How dare he treat his wife like that? That man has no shame." I nodded, saying no more, but I felt I had an ally. Suddenly I remembered that Ms. Camilla had a camera at her entrance. "Hey, Ms. Camilla, could your camera have recorded anything last night?" I asked. She nodded, immediately opened the app on her phone, and showed me the video. I recorded the scene on my phone of Sarah at my door, knocking desperately, her faint cries echoing in the night. Seeing that image made my heart ache all over again, but at the same time, I knew it would be a key piece of evidence. I took Ms. Camilla's hand and thanked her from the bottom of my soul. She just patted my hand and said firmly, "Don't forget to get justice for that girl. I trust you can do it." I went into my bedroom, opened the closet, and looked at my police uniform hanging impeccably. The blue shirt, the khaki pants, the belt, and the gun holster, everything seemed to be waiting for me. I took each piece, feeling the rough fabric under my fingers. In silence, I changed, buttoning each button, adjusting the belt. Each movement was like an oath. I was not only Sarah's mother, I was also a police officer, and I would use everything I had to protect her. When I finished, I picked up the phone and dialed James Ellison, the family lawyer. His voice sounded sleepy on the other end. "Hello?" I was brief. "James, start the plan. Right now." He was silent for a moment and then asked, "Elizabeth, are you sure?" I answered without a second of hesitation. "Completely. Get ready." I hung up and went to the living room. I took my digital camera out of a drawer. I approached the bed where Sarah was sleeping, carefully removed the blanket, and started photographing each of her injuries: the split lip, the bruised eye, the bruise on her stomach. Every time the flash went off, I felt I was not only documenting the physical wounds, but also the deep damage to her soul. When I finished, I sat at the dining room table and spread out all the papers and the USB drive with the video from Ms. Camilla's house. I connected the drive to my laptop and carefully backed everything up. Sitting there watching the screen light up, I knew that from that moment on, there was no turning back. I had entered a war not just for Sarah, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. By the time I finished backing up the video from Ms. Camilla's camera, the clock read 8 in the morning. Sarah was still fast asleep in bed, her face swollen and her lips dry and cracked, as if she couldn't escape the pain even in her dreams. I quietly went into the kitchen and made a bowl of chicken soup. The smell of onion and herbs filled the air. I brought the tray to her bed and woke her up gently. She opened her eyes, her gaze tired, and was surprised to see me there dressed in my police uniform. "Mom?" she murmured, then shook her head. "I'm not hungry." I sat beside her, trying to make my voice as gentle as possible. "To be strong and move forward, you have to eat." Sarah looked at me, her eyes watery, and reluctantly took the spoon, swallowing with difficulty. Seeing her like this squeezed my heart. Just a few years ago, Sarah was a radiant young woman, always smiling, filling the house with joy. Now she was here, broken, a shadow of her former self. I decided to take her back to the hospital for another checkup. The bruise on her stomach worried me. Dr. Letitia Figueroa received us in the emergency room, her face serious but without saying much. She ordered a CT scan to make sure there was no internal bleeding. While we waited for the results, I sat in the waiting room, took out my laptop, and connected the USB drive. The video appeared on the screen. At 1:02 in the morning, Sarah was at my front door, knocking desperately, her muffled sobs echoing through the microphone. Seeing that image made my heart ache again, as if I were reliving that night. I copied the video to an external hard drive, password protected it, taking care of every detail. I knew what I was doing was not just to protect Sarah, but to build a wall of evidence against Robert. Just then, Sarah's cell phone rang. The screen read, "Robert Mendez." I felt my heart stop. I grabbed the phone before Sarah could react and turned it off immediately. Sarah looked at me terrified. "Mom, if he finds out I talked, he won't leave me alone." Her voice trembled, as if the mere mention of his name plunged her into darkness. I squeezed her hand tightly, trying to calm her. "I'm here, sweetheart. Nothing is going to happen to you." But I said no more. I just looked at the clock in silence. It was almost 10 in the morning. I took the SIM card out of Sarah's phone and put in another one I had ready. I didn't want him to find her. I didn't want him to have the chance to threaten her again. The CT scan results came back a few minutes later, confirming that Sarah had several severe soft tissue contusions, but luckily, no internal bleeding. I let out a breath, but the relief was momentary. The wounds on Sarah's body would heal, but the ones in her soul I knew would need much more time. I took her home and called James Ellison, the lawyer. "I have the medical records and the video from the neighbor's camera," I told him bluntly. He scheduled a meeting at his office in the afternoon to gather the evidence. Meanwhile, Ms. Camilla came over with a pot of still hot chicken broth. "This is for Sarah to get her strength back," she said with her warm voice. "If you need a witness, count on me." I looked at her, feeling her sincere support, and my heart felt a little stronger. In the afternoon, Sarah tried to rest, but she would wake up startled from nightmares. I sat by her side trying to calm her, but she just babbled fearfully. Robert pushed me and Denise. She was in a corner mocking me. Hearing that, I felt the blood rush to my head. "Who is Denise?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. Sarah told me in a weak voice that Denise was Robert's mistress, that she had come to their house several times shamelessly, showing off, provoking Robert to take it out on her. Her story was like a knife in my heart. I had eaten at the same table as Robert. I had thought he was a decent man who would take care of my daughter, and now it turned out he was not only cheating on her, but letting another woman humiliate her in her own home. Sitting by the bed, I took out my cell phone and took close-up pictures of the bruises on Sarah's wrists, including the watch to show the exact time. With every picture I took, I felt I was not only documenting the physical wounds, but also the pain my daughter carried. I knew these photos would be evidence, but they were also a reminder of what I had to do to protect her. In the afternoon, I took Sarah to James's office with a portfolio containing all the evidence I had gathered. He opened it and laid everything on the table: the photos of the injuries, the medical report, and the video on the USB. James nodded, his voice firm. "This is a pretty solid foundation. Now we just need to prove public adultery, and he'll have nowhere to run." I gripped the handle of my purse, knowing perfectly well what my next step was. I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was a cop, and I would use everything I had to make Robert pay. That night, I didn't take Sarah to my house. I didn't want her to be in a place where Robert could find her. Instead, I left her at Ms. Camilla's house, my trusted neighbor. She opened her doors for her to stay the night and promised to keep a close eye on her. I returned home alone, my heart heavy. I took off my police uniform and put on an old jacket and jeans, trying to look like an ordinary person and not an officer looking for evidence. I took the digital camera out of the drawer, checked the battery and memory card, and left in my old car. Every turn of the tires reminded me that I was entering a war not just for Sarah, but for the justice I had sworn to uphold. I parked the car in a dark alley near the Arches Bar, the place Sarah had told me Robert frequented. The neon light from the place lit up a piece of the street. I sat in the car, hunched down, camera in hand, waiting. Around 8 p.m., Robert's silver truck appeared, its headlights sweeping the alley. My heart raced, but I remained calm and turned on the camera. Ready. A few minutes later, a woman came out from the corner. She was wearing a tight red dress, her lips painted a deep color, and a cigarette in her hand. She walked with a provocative confidence. I recognized her immediately. It was Denise Salgado, the woman Sarah had told me about Robert's mistress, the one who had made my daughter suffer. Robert turned off the engine, got out, and opened the door for Denise, wrapping his arm around her waist with familiarity. Seeing him, I felt my blood boil. He, the one who had sat down to eat in my house, the one who had called me mother-in-law, was now embracing another woman, while my daughter was in a bed full of bruises. I snapped picture after picture. The neon light from the bar clearly illuminated their faces. Each photo was like a stab, but also another piece in the puzzle I was putting together to unmask him. I followed them from a distance to a small hotel with a flashing red light sign. I didn't get close, just stayed far away, and took a couple more photos of them entering the lobby hand in hand. Then I went around to the parking lot and took a picture of Robert's truck license plate, making sure a nearby digital clock showed the time. Each photo was a bullet, and I knew I had what would leave him with no escape. When I got home, I opened my laptop and moved all the photos to a special password-protected folder. I called James, the lawyer, with a determination I couldn't hide. "I have the photos of his infidelity. You can see their faces. You can see the car's license plate." James responded with a firm voice. "Excellent, Elizabeth. Keep them safe. Don't let him know you have them." I nodded, although he couldn't see me, feeling a little more relieved, knowing I was one step closer to justice. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was Sarah calling from Ms. Camilla's number. Her voice sounded distressed. "Mom, he just called a friend of mine to ask where I am. When she told him, she didn't know he threatened her too. I'm so scared." Hearing Sarah, I felt my heart shrink. My daughter, even though she had escaped Robert, was still tormented by his threats. I reassured her. "You stay calm. Stay at Ms. Camilla's house. I have him under surveillance." But inside I knew I had to act faster before he found a way to hurt Sarah again. I immediately contacted Commander Rosales, a trusted colleague at the station. I presented him with all the evidence I had gathered, the video from Ms. Camilla Serra's medical history and the photos of the infidelity. "I need you to send a patrol to watch the neighborhood, especially Ms. Camilla's house," I said, my voice hard. Rosales agreed without hesitation, but not without warning me first. "Elizabeth, what you're doing is very dangerous, but if you have enough evidence, I'm sure you'll win." I thanked him and gave him a copy of the infidelity photos in case something happened to me. That night I couldn't sleep a wink. I sat at the dining room table organizing all the data into files, proof of the injuries, the camera video, and the photos of the infidelity. Each file was like an accusation, one more step to bring Robert to light. But in my heart I couldn't shake the pain. I had once considered him a son. I had believed he would protect Sarah. And now not only had he betrayed her, but he had dared to raise a hand to her, to threaten her, all for another woman. That pain, like a deep cut, hurt me every time I thought about Sarah's bruises. The next morning I took Sarah to Aeneas Quiroga, a psychologist James had recommended. Sarah needed help to overcome the trauma of the days of abuse. I stayed in the waiting room, my heart heavy. Watching my daughter walk into the office, walking slowly with her shoulders slumped, was like a stone in my chest. I, who thought I was a strong mother, a tough cop, had not been able to protect her from the man I trusted. That pain, like a deep cut, hurt me every time I remembered Sarah's bruised face. While I was sitting there, my phone vibrated. It was Ramiro Alcazar, the head of the Public Property Registry, whom I knew from some previous dealings. His voice sounded grave and a little rushed. "Mrs. Arriaga, it's not wise to talk much on the phone, but I just saw your name and your daughter's on a land transfer file. Something strange. If you have time, you should come by." I frowned, not understanding what he was talking about. Sarah and I hadn't done any transfer paperwork, but a bad feeling made me get up immediately. I told Aeneas I would be back for Sarah later. When I arrived at the public registry, Ramiro motioned for me to enter his office. He opened a file, frowning. "There's something strange here. This land was transferred to a Denise Salgado last week, but since you didn't call me to confirm, I found it odd." I froze. I felt my blood run cold. "It can't be!" I exclaimed, my voice choked. "Sarah and I never signed anything." Ramiro shook his head and handed me the file. "The signatures are here with your name and your daughter's, and the transaction is already filed." I took the paper and saw shaky signatures which looked nothing like ours. I immediately asked, "Who came to deliver these papers?" Ramiro replied in a low voice. "The employee told me it was your son-in-law, Robert. He said you had asked him to handle it because you were busy." Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. Robert had not only hit Sarah, not only cheated on her, but he had dared to forge our signatures to steal the land, my father's inheritance, what my family had cared for years. I tried to stay calm and asked Ramiro for a photocopy of the file. He sighed. "Someone from in here surely helped him with the paperwork." Before I left, he whispered, "Elizabeth, this is dangerous. Be careful that no one in the office knows I told you." I nodded, thanked him, and promised not to betray him. But inside, I felt like I was walking on pins and needles. Robert was not just a violent man. He was a manipulator willing to do anything to get his way. In the afternoon, I went to pick up Sarah from her therapy. She looked tired, but her gaze was no longer one of panic. I took her directly to Lawyer James's office with the photocopy of the forged papers. James reviewed them carefully, tapping the table with his fingers, and said firmly, "This is the final nail in the coffin. Now we also have proof of fraud, enough for him to have no escape." Sarah, sitting next to me, listened in silence, but her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, he dared to forge the signatures to steal Grandpa's land," she said with a trembling voice, both pained and indignant. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to give her some strength. But I was also fighting my own pain. That land was not just a property, it was a memory. It was my father's sweat, something our family had cared for generations, and Robert had dared to trample all over it just for his ambition and his betrayal. That night, I met with Commander Rosales and gave him the copy of the fake papers. He nodded, his gaze serious. "Your evidence is very solid. I assure you he won't get away." I thanked him, but I still had a weight on my heart. When I got home, I locked all the documents in the small safe in my bedroom. The clock showed almost midnight, but I wasn't sleepy at all. I sat in the dark, thinking about Robert, about what he had done to Sarah, to our family. That pain, like a slow fire, burned and drove me at the same time. I knew the time had come to face him directly. There was no other option. On Saturday morning, I left Sarah at Miss Camila's house, the safest place for her at that moment. Commander Rosales had someone watching outside, and I knew she would be protected, but my heart was not at ease. I put on civilian clothes, an old jacket and jeans, but I hid a file in my bag with the evidence I had carefully prepared. The photos of Sarah's injuries, the video from the neighbor's camera, the hospital report, and the photocopy of the fake land papers. I drove my old car to Robert's pawn shop, the place where he did his business, and flaunted his power in town. Every turn of the tires reminded me that this was not a simple trip, but an inevitable confrontation. The pawn shop was open. A smell of machine oil and cigarette smoke hit me in the face. Two of Robert's henchmen were arranging things on the shelves and gave me a sideways glance when I entered. One of them smiled mockingly. "Look, the mother-in-law arrived." I ignored them and walked straight to the back office where Robert was sitting counting money with stacks of dollar bills piled on a wooden desk. He looked up and gave a fake smile. "What's up, police mother-in-law? Are you so unoccupied that you have time to visit your son-in-law?" His voice was loaded with sarcasm, but I paid him no mind. I hadn't come to argue or chat. I put the file on his desk. Each page was like an accusation. The photos of Sarah's bruises, the video from Ms. Camilla's camera with my daughter's cries in the early morning, the hospital report detailing her injuries, and the photocopy of the fake papers he had dared to sign for me and for Sarah. Robert glanced at them. His face changed for an instant, but he quickly regained his air of confidence, hiding it with a contemptuous smile. "And what about these little papers? I have better lawyers than you." I looked him in the eyes, my voice cold. "I didn't come to argue with you. If you want to see who's right, we'll see each other in court." He jumped up, his voice restrained, as if I had touched his pride. "Who's going to dare to touch me? Who's going to stand against me in this town?" I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in his arrogant eyes. "I will. Don't think everyone is afraid of you." Jan, the two guys at the entrance tried to approach, but I put my hand in my jacket pocket, revealing my police badge. They stopped dead in their tracks, their gazes evasive. Robert turned red, slammed the table hard, and almost shouted, "Your daughter is a weakling. She deserved to be disciplined, and don't think that badge will always save you." Hearing that, I felt my blood boil. He dared to say that Sarah, my daughter, whom I loved more than my life, deserved to be disciplined. He dared to justify the bruises the night Sarah had to flee in pain. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to pounce on him and grab him by the neck. But I held back. I didn't answer. Just collected the file in silence, put it in my bag, and turned to leave. Before I left, I turned back and said firmly, "Just so you're clear, from now on, the rules of the game have changed. It's not you who's going to discipline anyone. It's the law that's going to discipline you." Robert shouted at my back, "If you walk out that door, you stop being my mother-in-law, and then don't complain if I get nasty." I stopped, looked at him one last time, without a hint of fear. "Well, consider that from now on, you are no longer my daughter's husband." I went out into the street where the wind was kicking up dust from the dirt road. I got in the car and immediately called James. "It's time to file the lawsuit." James replied, his voice calm but cautious. "All right, get ready. He's going to counterattack with everything he's got." I nodded, though he couldn't see me, my heart as cold as steel. I knew this war wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. A few days after my confrontation with Robert at the pawn shop, rumors started spreading through the neighborhood like wildfire. Early in the morning, I went to the market for some vegetables, trying to act normal, but the whispers reached my ears. Two ladies at the corner stall were whispering that Sarah probably made it all up. They say she talked back to her husband a lot, that's why he hit her. I walked past them, and they fell silent, but their gazes followed me, as if I were the one causing trouble. In the cafe next door, an old man sipped his coffee and shook his head. "Elizabeth is now using her badge to screw over her son-in-law." Hearing that, it felt like a dagger in my chest. These people who greeted me every morning, who smiled at Sarah when she was a child, now so easily believed Robert's lies. I lowered my head and quickened my pace, trying not to let them see my eyes welling up with tears. At noon, James called me to his office. He placed a stack of papers in front of me, his voice grave. Robert just hired Hector Valdivia, a lawyer from Mexico City. He filed a countersuit. He says Sarah made everything up to extort him and that you're abusing your authority as a police officer. I took the lawsuit. I saw Valdivia's signature in blue ink still fresh. The words on the paper were like direct accusations against Sarah and me, as if we were the bad guys, the ones trying to ruin Robert's life. Sarah, sitting next to me, turned pale and said with a trembling voice, "Mom, he wants to make me out to be a liar." Seeing her, I felt my heart clench. Sarah, my sweet daughter, now had to endure not only the bruises on her body, but also the slander of the man she once loved. I took her hand and squeezed it, trying to give her some strength, but inside I felt an indescribable pain. I had thought this town where I was born and raised would be on our side, but now it seemed the whole world was turning its back on us. In the afternoon, I took Sarah to Miss Camilla's house. As we passed through an alley, I saw Robert's 2 henchmen standing there smoking, staring at us. One of them lifted his chin and said sarcastically, "Be careful, people around here believe Robert more than you." I didn't answer, just squeezed Sarah's hand and got her into the house. But those words were like stones thrown at my heart, making me feel more alone than ever. I immediately called Rosales to inform him of the threat. He promised to reinforce patrols at night, but his voice also sounded worried. "Elizabeth, be careful. That guy is trying everything to turn the situation around." I nodded and thanked him, but inside I knew I was walking a very dangerous path. That night I went to the corner store to buy something to eat. The owner, an acquaintance of many years, took me to a corner and whispered, "Elizabeth, be careful. People are saying all over that you made everything up to take the land from your son-in-law." Hearing that, a chill ran down my spine. The people who had been my neighbors, with whom I had shared stories, now believed I was a schemer. I thanked her, tried to smile, but as I left the store I felt the world was caving in on me. When I got home, I found an unmarked envelope slipped under the door, inside a note in scribbled handwriting. "Shut up, or you lose your daughter." I took the paper. My hands trembled, but not from fear. I was furious. Furious because Robert dared to threaten my daughter. Furious because the people around me were so easily manipulated. I carefully filed the note in the evidence file, knowing it would be another piece to unmask him. Late at night, I had an emergency meeting with James at his office. He saw the threatening note and nodded slightly. Good, the dirtier he plays, the more he tangles himself up. But public opinion is on his side. We need a strong blow to change things. And the only one who can do that is Denise. Hearing James mention Denise, I felt a small light of hope ignite in the darkness. Denise, Robert's mistress, could be the key to turning the situation around. But at the same time, I knew bringing her to our side wouldn't be easy. I stood there in the dim light of the office, thinking about Sarah, about the bruises on her body, about the lies that were suffocating us. That pain, like a slow fire, burned and drove me at the same time. I was not going to let Robert win. I was not going to let his lies hide the truth. The day after the tense confrontation at the pawn shop, I found out that Denise used to frequent a small bar at the end of Hidalgo Street. I knew it was my chance to change the course of the game, to turn the tables on the hand Robert thought he had won. I put on a baggy jacket and a cap, trying to go unnoticed. When I entered the place, ranchera music was blasting. Cigarette smoke hung in the air, and the smell of beer and tequila mixed in the atmosphere. I chose a table in a dark corner, sat down, and kept my eyes on the door. I didn't want to be recognized. I didn't want any of Robert's people to see me before I could talk to Denise. Around 10 at night, she appeared. In a short, tight dress, her lips painted a deep red, and a cocktail in her hand, she walked with a confidence that seemed forced. I looked at her and felt a mix of anger and pity. This was the woman who had contributed to my daughter's suffering, but at the same time, I knew she was also just a pawn in Robert's game. I took a deep breath, got up, and sat across from her. Denise raised an eyebrow, her voice defensive. "And who are you?" I didn't answer right away, just placed an envelope on the table in silence. Inside was a copy of the fake land papers Robert had schemed, along with a bank statement for Denise, full of accumulated debts and the risk of foreclosure. I looked her in the eyes and said sharply, "I'm Robert's mother-in-law. If you stay on his side, you'll go down with him. But if you cooperate, you'll save yourself." Denise let out a mocking laugh, but it vanished from her face as soon as she opened the envelope and saw the papers. She turned pale. Her gaze faltered as she saw the forged signature on the transfer and the red numbers of her debts. I continued in a cold but firm voice. "The police commander already knows everything. As soon as the trial starts, you'll be called to testify for fraud, and you could even face a serious sentence. Is that what you want?" Denise was quiet for a long time. The hand holding her cocktail was trembling. She downed her drink in one gulp, as if to give herself courage, and then said in a shaky voice, "Robert promised me he'd give me a share of the land. He said everything would be fine, that I would have it all. But now I understand he just used me." Hearing her, I felt a bit of pity. Denise, though misguided, was another victim of Robert's manipulation. But I didn't let my emotions get the best of me. I looked at her intently. "You have one last chance to get out of this clean. Tell the truth at the trial. I will take that into account." Just then, the bar door swung open, and Robert's two henchmen walked in. They looked around, and their eyes locked on me, sitting with Denise. They approached with unfriendly faces. Without hesitation, I took my police badge out of my pocket and placed it on the table. "Want to try something? Go ahead." The dim light of the place shone on the badge, and the two guys stopped, slowly backing towards the door, their eyes still full of hatred. Denise was breathing heavily, pale, as a sheet clinging to the edge of the table. I looked at her and said in a grave but determined voice, "See, Robert can't protect you. He's only going to drag you down with him." Denise bit her lip. Her eyes were torn between fear and determination. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll testify, but you have to promise me I'll be safe." I didn't promise much. I just nodded. "If you do the right thing, I'll do everything I can." Then I immediately called Rosales, told him the situation, and asked him to get a secure apartment on the outskirts for Denise to hide in. Leaving the bar, I walked down the cold, dark street, the wind making me shiver. But inside, I felt a great relief. I knew the battle had turned. Robert had just lost his most important piece. The morning of the trial, I woke up at 5 when the sky was still dark. I went to the kitchen and made a light chicken broth. The gentle aroma seemed to want to calm the tension that filled the house. I brought the tray to the bed where Sarah was still sleeping. Seeing her there, her face still a little swollen and her lips dry, squeezed my heart. I woke her gently, whispering, "Eat something, honey, so you'll have strength." Sarah opened her eyes, her gaze tired, but she nodded and sat up slowly. I helped her put on a long, light blue dress and put a thin scarf around her neck to cover the bruise that was still visible. I fixed her hair and said softly, "You don't have to hang your head anymore." Sarah looked at me, her eyes watery, but she didn't say anything. Just took my hand as if it were the only way to feel safe. Outside the house, Commander Rosales was already waiting for us with a patrol car. He greeted me with a nod. His look was serious but warm. "I've arranged an escort, Elizabeth. Everything will be fine today," he said. I thanked him, feeling a bit of relief knowing I wasn't alone. On the way to the courthouse, I saw the townspeople gathered in the square whispering. Some looked at us with curiosity, others nodded slightly as if in support, but there were also those who shook their heads with mistrust. The rumors Robert had spread still hung in the air, and I knew that today's battle was not just against him, but to reclaim the truth. Arriving at the courthouse entrance, I saw Robert. He was standing there in an impeccable suit, his face red and his gaze sharp as a knife. Beside him, the lawyer, Valdivia, seemed calm, but I knew he was tense. Denise was there too, standing far from Robert, her arms crossed and her gaze distant. Seeing her, I remembered the night at the bar when I convinced her to switch sides, and I felt a spark of hope. But I knew today wouldn't be easy. I took Sarah's hand and led her into the courtroom. Inside, the place was packed. The old wooden benches creaked as people settled in. I saw Ms. Camilla in the back row. She nodded at me encouragingly, as if to say she would always be there supporting us. Judge Arturo Cervantes entered, and the whole room stood up. The air felt thick. The only sound was the whir of the ceiling fan, like the heartbeat of the room. Lawyer James began. His voice was deep and confident. He presented the case. Each piece of evidence was laid out before the court. The photos of Sarah's injuries, Dr. Figueroa's report, detailing the lesions, the video from Ms. Camilla's camera that recorded Sarah's cries in the early morning, and the copy of the forged land papers that Ramiro Alcazar had provided us. When James projected the video on the screen, Sarah's knocks on the door and her faint sobs filled the room. I heard murmurs among the people. Some were wiping their eyes. I looked at Sarah beside me. Her hands were shaking and her head was bowed. I put a hand on her shoulder and squeezed it gently, as if to tell her I was still there, that I would always be there. Lawyer Valdivia rose to rebut. His voice was sharp. Sarah invented everything to extort my client. Elizabeth Arriaga abused her authority as a police officer to coerce and slander. Those words were like daggers in my heart. I wanted to jump up to scream that he was lying, that Sarah's bruises were not an invention, but James signaled for me to calm down. He presented Robert's threatening messages, which were clearly visible on the big screen. "Shut up if you don't want to be replaced." The room fell silent. Sarah bowed her head. Her hands trembled more violently, and I knew she was remembering the months she lived in fear. I squeezed her shoulder, trying to give her some of my strength. Then it was Denise's turn. She took the stand, trembling, her gaze hesitant. "Robert promised to give me a share of the land," she said, her voice shaky but clear. "He pressured me to accept the transfer papers, saying everything was arranged, but the truth is he forged his wife's signature to steal the land from her." Robert jumped up, shouting, "You betrayed me!" The court guards had to force him to sit down, while Judge Cervantes said sternly, "Order, or I will have you removed from the courtroom." Denise bowed her head but continued to testify. Each word was like a hammer shattering Robert's lies. Seeing her, I felt a little relief, but I couldn't help the pain in my heart. Denise had been part of Sarah's suffering, but now she had chosen to be on the side of the truth. When it was my turn, I took the stand and swore before the court. I looked directly at the people, my voice firm. "I am a police officer, but today I am here as a mother. I will not allow anyone, not even my son-in-law, to destroy my daughter and mock the law." I pointed at Robert without a trace of fear in my eyes. That man is not a husband. He is not a father. He is just an abuser and a liar. The whole room murmured. Some of the people who had believed in Robert looked at each other confused. I saw Ms. Camilla's gaze. She nodded, as if telling me I had done the right thing. Finally, Judge Cervantes stood up to read the verdict. His voice was grave and clear, but I didn't hear every word. I only knew that he issued a protection order. For Sarah froze all of Robert's assets, nullified the land transfer, and sent the case to the district attorney's office to investigate the crimes of usury and domestic violence. A roar of murmurs filled the room. Robert slumped in his chair, his face pale, as if all his strength had vanished. Valdivia remained silent, taking off his glasses to wipe away the sweat. I took Sarah's hand and led her out of there. The midday sun shone brightly on the courthouse steps, and I heard people whispering, "Elizabeth won. Justice won." But inside, I knew that this victory did not erase the wounds Sarah had suffered. I only hoped that from this day on, she could begin to find her smile again. The afternoon of the trial, when Judge Arturo Cervantes finished reading the verdict, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. I didn't hear every one of his words, but when I saw Robert collapse in his chair, his face pale, I knew we had won. The ruling dictated a protection order. For Sarah froze Robert's assets, annulled the fraudulent land transfer, and sent the case to the district attorney's office to investigate the crimes of domestic violence and usury. When I took Sarah's hand and we left the courthouse, the midday sun was shining on the steps, and I heard people whisper, "Elizabeth won. Justice won. But inside, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt relief, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. But the pain was still there like a scar that would never fully heal. That same afternoon, the police went to Robert's pawn shop to arrest him. People crowded the street to watch. Some whistled at him, others shouted insults to his face. I wasn't there, but the next morning, when the local newspaper published a photo of Robert in a prison uniform and handcuffs under the headline, "Pawn Shop Owner Arrested for Violence and Land Fraud," I felt something strange. It wasn't joy, it was a kind of liberation. He who had sat at my table, who had called me mother-in-law, was now paying for what he had done. But that feeling was quickly replaced by sadness. I had trusted him. I had thought he would take care of Sarah. The pain of being betrayed by a family member like a slow burn still seared inside me. Denise disappeared from town a few days after the trial. It was rumored she had gone to Monterey to look for work to start over. I didn't blame her. She had been part of Sarah's pain, but in the end, she had chosen the truth. Robert's 2 henchmen, the ones who called themselves Los Chamucos, were also arrested for witness tampering. The neighborhood suddenly felt calmer. There were no more hateful glares or silent threats. But I knew that the wounds Robert had left on Sarah and me wouldn't disappear so easily. Sarah moved in with me permanently. The first few days, she could barely sleep. She would wake up startled every night, sweating, screaming, "Mom, he's coming!" In those moments, I would sit by her side, take her hand and whisper, "It's okay, honey, you're safe now." But seeing Sarah, I saw myself, years ago, when I too kept silent in the face of my own pain. I took her to Aeneas Quiroga, the psychologist, every week, without fail. Aeneas listened to Sarah with patience, helping her face her nightmares step by step. After a few weeks, I started to notice a change. Sarah no longer covered her face when she went out. She no longer hung her head when she walked through the market. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen making enchiladas, and as she folded the tortillas, she sang softly. That song, as gentle as the wind, brought tears to my eyes. It had been so long since I had heard my daughter sing. It was as if the sun was starting to enter the house again. The town also began to change its attitude. The neighbors who had doubted, who had believed Robert's rumors, now greeted me. Some came up to apologize with regret in their voices. "Mrs. Elizabeth, we didn't know the truth." I just nodded without resentment. I understood that Robert's lies had been convincing, and not everyone has the courage to stand up to someone like him. Miss Camilla came to visit with a tray of sweet bread, and she hugged Sarah tightly. "You turned out stronger than your mother in her day." Seeing them laugh together warmed my heart, as if people's kindness still existed despite the dark days. I continued my work at the station. Every daily patrol was a reminder of my duty. Every time I encountered a case of violence, I felt more determined to help other women break the silence. Once I found a young girl crying outside the station, her eyes red, clutching her purse. I sat next to her and said in a soft voice, "You're not alone. My mother lived it. My daughter lived it, and I too stayed silent once. But today I know that silence only feeds the monster." The girl looked at me. The tears were still streaming, but there was a new glint in her eyes. I knew I couldn't erase her pain, but at least I could show her that someone was willing to listen. A few months later, Sarah felt strong enough to go back to work. She got a job in an accounting office in the town center. That night she came home late, opening the door with a radiant smile. "Mom, I got the job." I stood up and hugged her with all my might, and we both cried. They weren't tears of pain, but of joy of liberation. Seeing Sarah there smiling like the sun reminded me of the little girl who used to run after me in the yard shouting, "Mom, look at me." I knew the wounds in her heart were still there, but she was learning to move on to find herself again. That night I sat on the porch. The wind was blowing coolly. I remembered the night Sarah collapsed at my door, her face covered in bruises, telling me in a trembling voice what Robert had done to her. I remembered the months of struggle, the sleepless nights, the moments I thought I would break under the lies and mistrust of the entire town. But then I looked at Sarah's smile today and I thought, justice is sometimes slow, but when it comes, it can give you back your breath, your laughter, and even your future. I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold now, but I felt a peace in my heart that I hadn't felt in a long time. Sarah had come back, and I thought I carried the scars of the past, had found a reason to keep fighting, not just for my daughter, but for all the women who need someone to stand up for them. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I'm genuinely curious. If it were you in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all to get your voice back? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the end screen, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.